Blood splattered the cold marble floors of the Whitaker estate, the air thick with the metallic scent of betrayal. Judge Horace Whitaker stood frozen, his once commanding presence reduced to a trembling shadow. The bodies of his son, Jamal, and daughter-in-law, Vanessa, lay lifeless before him, a grim testament to the sins that had festered beneath his polished facade. Detective Marcus Holloway tightened his grip on the evidence bag. Inside, Vanessa's diary held the truth that would unravel it all. But as he pieced together the final puzzle, one chilling question remained. If not Horace, then who had truly pulled the trigger? Before we begin this gripping story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain fell steadily on Montgomery, Alabama, washing the sidewalks in a cold, silvery sheen. The town was quiet, but not because it was late. There was something heavy in the air, a tension that refused to break. That morning, 2 bodies had been found in a house on the wealthy side of town. Jamal Whitaker and his wife Vanessa had been brutally murdered. The scene was something out of a nightmare. Blood streaked the bedroom walls, a message scrawled across them in what looked like red ink but smelled of iron. Justice is served. The words sent shivers through the officers on duty. Detective Marcus Holloway stood outside the house, his jaw clenched. He had seen crime scenes before, but this was personal. Not because he knew Jamal well, but because the man's father was Judge Horace Whitaker, a man who had spent decades shaping Montgomery's legal system. Powerful, respected, untouchable. At least that was what people believed. Now, he was a grieving father, or so he claimed. Marcus had his doubts. Inside the house, the forensic team worked in silence. The crime scene told a story, but it was incomplete. There was no sign of forced entry. No shattered glass, no broken locks. Whoever did this had walked in as if they belonged. Jamal had been shot twice in the chest. A precise kill. Vanessa had suffered a different fate. Strangled, up close, personally. Someone had hated her enough to feel her last breath against their skin. A neighbor had reported hearing shouting earlier that night. A man's voice, angry and sharp, followed by a woman's desperate cries. Then silence. Hours later, the neighbor had woken to flashing police lights. No one had called for help. No one had come to save them. That was what haunted Marcus the most. If this was a crime of passion, it had burned slow and deep before finally erupting. Judge Whitaker arrived at the scene just before dawn, his expression carefully measured. His suit was immaculate despite the tragedy, his tie perfectly knotted. His hands, however, trembled slightly when he lit a cigarette. He exhaled, his face hard to read. My son, my only son, gone. His voice cracked, but Marcus wasn't sure if it was grief or something else. Something more calculated. The press swarmed like vultures, their cameras flashing in the darkness. This was a story that would shake the town to its core. A judge's son murdered in his own home. A woman taken too soon. Whispers of scandal already spread through the crowd. Rumors that Vanessa had secrets. That Jamal had enemies. That power, even in a family, could be a dangerous thing. Marcus watched the judge closely. He had seen many men break under pressure, but Horace Whitaker wasn't like other men. He stood tall, unshaken, as if he had already begun building the walls around himself. Marcus didn't believe in coincidences. Not in a case like this. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it a question no one dared to ask. Who had truly pulled the trigger? The funeral was grand, as expected. The Whitaker name demanded nothing less. The church overflowed with mourners, some real, some only there to witness the spectacle. 2 caskets stood at the front, draped in white and gold, the air thick with the scent of lilies and polished wood. Judge Horace Whitaker sat in the first pew, his face carved from stone, his fingers interlocked tightly. He had not shed a single tear, though his voice cracked when he thanked the congregation for their support. Marcus Holloway stood at the back, watching. He had been to enough funerals to recognize forced grief. Horace Whitaker was performing. His movements were controlled, his sorrow measured. Even now, with his son buried beneath 6 feet of Alabama soil, the judge refused to look vulnerable. It didn't sit right. A father should be shattered, After the service, people whispered in small circles, careful not to be overheard. The rumors had already started. Some spoke of Jamal's enemies, others of Vanessa's affairs. But the most chilling whispers pointed to the judge himself, a man with everything to lose. A man who had once sworn to uphold justice, but had long since learned how to bend it to his will. Marcus took his time leaving the church, lingering near the entrance as Horace stepped outside. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. The judge answered none of them. His driver opened the car door, but before he could step inside, Marcus moved closer. Strange, isn't it? His voice was calm, but he watched the judge's reaction carefully. A double homicide, no forced entry, no witnesses. That usually means one thing. Someone close to the victims. Someone they trusted. Horace turned slowly, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "Are you accusing me, detective?" "I'm just pointing out the facts," Marcus said. "And the fact is, Vanessa's wedding ring was found in your office." The judge didn't blink. He didn't deny it either. Instead, he exhaled slowly, adjusting his tie. "Vanessa often came to me for advice." Marcus tilted his head. "That right? And what about you, Judge? Were you the best father?" Horace's jaw tightened. "My son is dead, detective, and I expect you to find out who did it." He stepped into the car and shut the door before Marcus could say anything else. The black sedan pulled away, vanishing into the quiet streets of Montgomery. Marcus stood there for a long moment, hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of something heavy settle in his chest. There was more to this story, and he would find it. Jamal Whitaker had always been the kind of man who refused to back down. He had spent years trying to carve out his own path, determined not to live in the shadow of his father. The courtroom was his battleground, the law his weapon. He had built a reputation as a defense attorney who fought for the underprivileged, the ones his father's courtroom had swallowed whole. But in the weeks leading up to his murder, something had changed. He had been restless, distracted. His late nights at the office turned into sleepless nights at home. Vanessa had noticed. Their arguments had grown louder, their silences heavier. He had been hiding something, and now he was dead before anyone could learn what it was. Marcus Holloway sat at Jamal's desk, flipping through files the police had recovered from his office. He found what he was looking for in a locked drawer, one that had been forced open. A set of documents, pages marked with names, dates, case numbers, all linked to Horace Whitaker. Marcus scanned the notes. It wasn't just corruption, it was a cover-up. Cases that had been buried, evidence that had been tampered with. And at the bottom of the pile, a name that made his blood run cold. Vanessa Whitaker. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was Jamal's assistant. Marcus arrived at the assistant's apartment within the hour. The man was nervous, his hands shaking as he handed over a flash drive. "Jamal gave me this the night before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I should take it to the police." Marcus plugged the drive into his laptop. A video played. It was dark, grainy, but the voices were clear. Jamal's voice, tight with anger. And another voice, deeper, measured. Horace Whitaker. "I know what you did." Jamal's voice hissed. "I know about Vanessa." A pause. Then Horace's voice, calm but cold. "Son, some truths are better left buried." Marcus shut the laptop. His stomach twisted. Jamal had known. And now he was dead. The last time Vanessa Whitaker saw her husband alive, he had looked at her with something colder than anger. Disgust. His jaw was clenched so tightly, she thought his teeth might break. His hands balled into fists at his sides. He had found out. She didn't know how, but Jamal knew everything. The affair had started as something she told herself wasn't real. Horace was powerful, commanding, a man who knew how to make people feel important. When he spoke, she listened. When he touched her, she forgot who she was supposed to be. It hadn't been love. It had been a mistake, one she had tried desperately to erase. But Jamal had found out. That night, when he stormed into their bedroom, she knew there was no more pretending. He had proof. Texts, receipts, messages she had long since deleted. His voice cracked when he spoke, but his rage kept him steady. "How long, Vanessa? How long have you been lying to me?" She tried to explain, to beg, but there were no words that could fix what she had done. his face twisted with something unrecognizable. "You disgust me." That was the last thing he ever said to her. Hours later, she heard footsteps in the dark. The bedroom door creaked open, but when she turned, it wasn't Jamal standing there. The figure moved toward her, slow and deliberate. A shadow swallowed her scream before she could make a sound. The next morning, she was found strangled, her body cold, her lips parted as if she had been trying to speak one last truth. Now, Marcus Holloway stood over the crime scene photos, his gut twisting. Vanessa Whitaker had been many things. A liar, an adulteress. But she hadn't deserved to die like this. And whoever had killed her had done it with their bare hands. The house was silent when the clock struck 10. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of what had been said, what had been broken. Jamal sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. Vanessa had tried to reach for him, but he had pulled away, his muscles stiff with betrayal. He couldn't look at her without seeing his father's shadow between them. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A single message. "Come to my office. We need to talk." It was from Horace. Jamal exhaled sharply. There was nothing left to say. He had the evidence, the proof. His father's corruption, his father's affair, his father's lies. He was going to expose it all. Vanessa sat frozen, watching him. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his hand. One last time. He yanked his hand away. "Don't." His voice was hollow. "When this is over, we're done." The front door slammed behind him as he left. The silence swallowed Vanessa whole. She didn't hear the second set of footsteps entering the house. At 10:45, the first gunshot rang out. Jamal fell before he even had a chance to fight. 2 bullets to the chest, precise and unmerciful. The shooter stood over him, watching as the life drained from his eyes. Blood seeped into the cracks of the hardwood floor. The room smelled of gunpowder and iron. Upstairs, Vanessa heard the noise. Her breath hitched. She moved toward the door, but the moment she turned the knob, she felt the presence behind her. A hand clamped around her throat. She gasped, clawing at fingers like steel. The pressure was unbearable. Stars exploded behind her eyes. A voice whispered in her ear, "You should have stayed quiet." Her body went limp. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was the reflection in the mirror, her own wide, terrified eyes, and behind her, the face of someone she never thought capable of murder. At 11, the killer wiped their hands clean. Justice is served, and then they disappeared into the night. The crime scene was eerily still when Detective Marcus Holloway stepped through the front door. The scent of blood still clung to the walls, heavy and unmistakable. Officers moved carefully around him, their gloved hands dusting for prints, snapping photos, bagging evidence. But Marcus had seen enough crime scenes to know when something felt off. This one didn't scream chaos. It whispered calculation. Jamal Whitaker's body lay sprawled in the hallway, just a few feet from the front door. 2 clean gunshots to the chest. Precise. Too precise. Someone had wanted him dead, quickly and efficiently. But Vanessa's murder was different. Upstairs, her body had been left in the bedroom. The bedsheets tangled beneath her. Strangled, hands-on, personal, brutal. That kind of killing wasn't just about getting rid of someone. It was about making them suffer. Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. He had seen this kind of case before, when rage and power mixed, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. One of the forensic techs approached him. No forced entry. Whoever did this, they walked right in. Marcus glanced back at Jamal's body. That meant 2 things. The killer was someone they knew and someone they trusted. Then there was the writing. It was impossible to ignore. The words scrawled across the wall in a thick, dark smear. Justice is served. A message, but to who? A taunt? A warning? Marcus turned toward the lead investigator on scene. "Where's the father? Judge Whitaker?" The officer scoffed. "Already making calls, making sure this gets handled properly." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Of course he was. He moved toward the staircase, his boots echoing against the hardwood as he climbed. Vanessa's body was untouched now, but the marks on her neck told a story of struggle. She had fought. But against who? Marcus took a slow breath. He had a feeling this case was only going to get darker. And the deeper he dug, the uglier the truth would become. Marcus Holloway knew when a case was being buried. He had seen it happen before, when the guilty were too powerful, when justice was just a word, not a promise. And now, standing in the shadow of Judge Horace Whittaker's influence, he felt that same pressure tightening around the investigation. The morning after the murders, the judge held a press conference. His face was heavy with grief, his voice measured but broken. "My son and his wife were taken from me in a senseless act of violence. I have faith in our justice system to find whoever is responsible." The cameras captured every carefully rehearsed tremor in his voice. The public believed it, but Marcus saw through the performance. Back at the station, evidence had already started disappearing. A security feed from a traffic camera near the Whittaker house. Deleted. Phone records from the night of the murders. Suddenly sealed. Someone was cleaning up the mess before Marcus could even put the pieces together. He slammed a folder onto his desk, frustration burning through him. The evidence was slipping through his fingers, but one thing remained. Vanessa's wedding ring. It had been found in the most unexpected place. Judge Whittaker's private office. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. It didn't make sense, unless she had known something. A knock at his door broke his thoughts. A young officer stepped inside, her face pale. Says they saw someone enter the Whittaker house that night. Marcus sat up straight. Who? The officer hesitated. They wouldn't say over the phone, but they want to meet. Marcus grabbed his coat. He didn't know what this witness had seen, but if they were afraid to talk, it meant one thing. The truth was dangerous. The witness chose a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Marcus Holloway slid into the booth, watching as the nervous figure across from him fidgeted with the rim of their coffee cup. Tasha Davis, Vanessa's younger sister, her eyes darted toward the door before she finally spoke. "I shouldn't be here. If they find out..." "Who?" Marcus pressed. "Who are you afraid of?" Tasha swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the cup. "I saw him, Detective. I saw Horace Whittaker enter that house that night." Marcus felt his pulse slow, his mind calculating. That was big, but it wasn't enough. Just because the judge was there didn't mean he pulled the trigger. "You saw him go in." He kept his voice even. "What time?" "A little after 10. He was alone." "I was leaving Vanessa a message, and I saw his car parked down the street. He got out, looked around, then walked right in. He had a key." Marcus nodded slowly. The judge having access to his son's home wasn't shocking, but sneaking in, late at night, on the very night his son and daughter-in-law were murdered, that was different. "Did you see him leave?" Tasha hesitated, looking away. "No, but I heard something. A car speeding off around 11. I thought it was Jamal at first. Now you think it was the judge." Marcus finished for her. She nodded, her hands shaking. "Vanessa told me she was afraid of him. She didn't say why, but she was different those last few weeks. Nervous, like she knew something bad was coming." Marcus felt his gut tighten. Vanessa had known. That explained the wedding ring in the judge's office. She had been there. Maybe that night. Maybe she confronted him. Maybe she threatened to expose everything. And maybe that had been her last mistake. Tasha wiped at her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "You have to stop him." Marcus exhaled slowly. He didn't have enough yet. But he was getting close, and Horace Whittaker was running out of places to hide. Marcus Holloway sat in his car outside the Whittaker estate, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but something still felt off. Horace Whittaker had every reason to want Vanessa dead. She had been carrying his child, a scandal that could have destroyed him. But Jamal, his son, a clean professional kill. It didn't fit the same pattern. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. "Detective," the voice on the other end was shaky, rushed. "I don't have much time. You need to look closer. It's not just Horace." "Who is this?" Marcus demanded. A pause, then a whisper. "Check the DNA." The line went dead. Marcus's breath slowed. DNA? What DNA? His mind raced back to the evidence reports. The forensics team had taken samples from Vanessa's body, but there had been no mention of additional DNA findings. He threw the car into gear and sped toward the station. He needed to get into those files before they disappeared for good. An hour later, Marcus sat in the evidence room, flipping through the hidden report. His hands froze when he reached the final page. There were 2 sets of DNA under Vanessa's fingernails. One belonged to Horace Whitaker. Marcus inhaled sharply. It wasn't Jamal's. It wasn't Horace's. It was a match to Tasha Davis. His pulse pounded. Vanessa's own sister. The one who had come to him. The one who had led him straight to Horace. The one who had been too willing to talk. The memory hit him like a bullet. Vanessa told me she was afraid. But what if it wasn't Horace she was afraid of? Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He jumped to his feet. He needed to find Tasha, because now he wasn't just looking for a witness. He was looking for a killer. Thank you for watching this gripping story of power, betrayal, and justice. What would you have done if you were in Marcus Holloway's shoes? Leave your comments below and share your thoughts and reflections on this emotional and intense story. We want to hear your opinion, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you won't miss our most thrilling videos. Also, make sure to give a like and activate the notification bell so you never miss a single one of our stories.